My name is Amanda Wilson, 32 years old, and I learned long ago to keep my professional success separate from my family life. When I returned to Boston for my father Gerald's 60th birthday, I never expected his important business dinner would end with me being asked to wait in the car. Dad was desperate to impress potential investors, and apparently I was a liability. What none of them knew was that 20 minutes later, the CEO himself would walk through those doors, see me, and completely change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to join me for more stories about finding your worth when others can't see it. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Boston, I was always the odd one out in my family. Our house on Maple Street was modest but respectable, the kind of place where appearances mattered more than what was happening behind closed doors. My father Gerald built his real estate business from nothing, and he never let anyone forget it. His definition of success was narrow property, tangible assets, and a business you could touch and see. Real estate is reliable, Amanda. He would lecture me throughout my childhood. It's something solid, not like those computer dreams of yours. My mother Elaine was different, but not in ways that helped. She was kind and occasionally supportive in private, but never when it counted. Whenever Dad dismissed my interests, she would give me that sympathetic look, but remain silent. Her favorite phrase was, "That's just how your father is," as if his behavior was some immutable law of nature, rather than a choice. Then there was my older brother Ryan. He followed in Dad's footsteps from the moment he could walk. By high school, he was interning at Dad's company during summers. By college, he had his real estate license. Now at 35, he was Dad's right-hand man and presumptive heir to Wilson Properties. "Computers are for playing games," Sis Ryan would say, ruffling my hair even when I was 21 and about to graduate with honors in computer science. Real money is in real estate. I still remember the massive argument that finally pushed me to leave home at 22. I had just received a job offer from a promising tech startup in San Francisco. The salary wasn't impressive, but the opportunity was exactly what I wanted. "You're throwing your life away on some fly-by-night company that will be bankrupt in a year," Dad had thundered across the dinner table. "No daughter of mine is going to waste her education on this nonsense." "It's not nonsense to me," I had answered, my voice surprisingly steady, "and I'm going." "Then don't expect any help from us when you come crawling back," he had replied, his face flushed with anger. I left the next day, and I didn't crawl back. Not when the startup had its rocky first year. Not when I had to share a tiny apartment with 3 roommates to make rent. Not when I worked 80-hour weeks to prove myself in an industry dominated by men who constantly underestimated me. Over the next decade, I built my career from scratch. Our startup was eventually acquired by Bailey Industries, one of the largest tech corporations in the country. I moved up through the ranks quickly, earning promotions based on performance rather than connections. My family knew I worked in computers, but I stopped sharing details after every accomplishment was met with polite disinterest or outright dismissal. When the call came about Dad's 60th birthday party, I hadn't been home in 5 years. Our contact had been limited to occasional phone calls with Mom and obligatory holiday texts. Part of me wanted to send a gift and make an excuse, but something deeper pulled me back. Maybe it was hope that things could be different now. Maybe it was wanting to show them who I'd become. Either way, I booked the flight. The reunion at Logan Airport was as awkward as I expected. Mom hugged me too tight. Dad gave me a stiff pat on the shoulder, and Ryan made a joke about me, finally emerging from the internet. His wife, Patricia, whom I'd only met once at their wedding, offered a practiced smile and a comment about my sensible travel outfit. "We're having a special dinner tomorrow night," Dad announced as we drove from the airport. "Some very important investors are coming to discuss a new development project. The biggest deal of my career." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it. Despite our differences, I never wished him failure. "Bailey Industries is sending representatives," he continued, his voice swelling with pride. "They're looking to establish a corporate retreat and residential complex. If we land this deal, Wilson Properties will be handling the entire development. I felt a jolt of recognition at the company name, but kept my expression neutral. Sounds promising was all I said. More than promising, Ryan chimed in from the front seat. It's transformational. Dad's been working on this for months. Now, Amanda, Mom interjected, I've laid out a nice outfit for you to wear tomorrow, nothing too bold. These are very conservative business people. I bit my tongue and looked out the window at the familiar streets of my hometown. 10 years of professional achievement, and they still thought I needed help dressing appropriately for a business dinner. By the way, Dad added, glancing at me in the rearview mirror, what exactly is your title these days, in case anyone asks? The irony almost made me laugh. I'm in operations management, I said simply. No need to complicate things. Not yet. The morning of the dinner arrived with a flurry of activity throughout the house. Mom was up at 6 polishing silverware that already gleamed and arranging flowers in every room. Dad paced the hallways, muttering key points of his business pitch, under his breath like a mantra. The tension was palpable, as if the president himself was coming to dinner, rather than a few corporate representatives. I offered to help with preparations, but Mom waved me away. Just focus on getting yourself ready, dear. I laid out that navy blue dress on your bed. It's modest, but still professional. I glanced at the conservative dress she'd selected and suppressed a sigh. I brought my own clothes, Mom. I attend business dinners regularly. She paused, looking momentarily confused, as if the concept of me in professional settings was hard to grasp. Well, nothing too flashy, please. These investors are very traditional. Traditional, conservative, modest. The coded language wasn't lost on me. In their minds, I was still the rebellious daughter who needed guidance, not the woman who oversaw global operations for a multi-billion-dollar company. While my family scrambled to create the perfect impression, I took a moment to check my work emails. 3 urgent messages from my executive team about the Bailey Industries partnership negotiations needed responses. I handled them quickly, giving directions that would impact millions of dollars in business decisions, then set my phone aside to help Mom chop vegetables for the appetizers. The doorbell rang at noon, announcing Ryan and Patricia's arrival. My brother burst in like he owned the place, dressed in an expensive but slightly ill-fitting suit, reeking of cologne. The man of the hour, Dad greeted him, clasping his shoulder proudly. Ryan closed the Henderson property yesterday. 7 figures. Just doing my job, Ryan said, with false modesty, before turning to me. So, sis still playing with computers out in California? I smiled tightly. Something like that. You should let me know if you ever want to get into a real career, he continued, straightening his tie. I could probably find something entry-level for you at the office. Great benefits. Patricia laughed lightly. Ryan, be nice. I'm sure Amanda's little tech job is very fulfilling. I had long ago learned that defending my career to my family was pointless. They had created a narrative about my professional life that no facts could penetrate. In their story, I was the family disappointment who wasted my potential on a frivolous industry they didn't understand. As the afternoon progressed, Dad gathered everyone in the living room for what felt like a strategy session. These Bailey representatives could transform our business, he explained, spreading out property maps on the coffee table. They're looking for 50 acres to develop a corporate retreat and luxury residential community. I still can't believe we got Bailey Industries to the table, Ryan said, shaking his head in amazement. They're the 5th largest tech company in the country. 4th, I corrected automatically, then regretted speaking when all eyes turned to me. 4th, 5th, whatever, Dad waved dismissively. The point is, they have deep pockets, and we need to impress them, so everyone needs to be on their best behavior. His eyes lingered on me for a beat too long. What exactly does that mean? I asked. It means let me and Ryan handle the business talk, Dad replied. These people speak our language. Real estate is our world, not yours. I nodded silently, deciding this wasn't the hill to die on. Not yet anyway. As evening approached, the house transformed. Caterers arrived to finish preparing the gourmet meal Mom had started. The dining room table extended to its full length, gleamed with china and crystal that only emerged for special occasions. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, and soft classical music played through the house speakers. I retreated upstairs to get ready, selecting a simple but elegant black dress from my suitcase. It was the same outfit I'd worn to close a $100 million acquisition last month. Professional, sophisticated, and confident, exactly what the situation called for. I applied minimal makeup and styled my hair in a sleek updo, the same look I wore to board meetings. When I came downstairs, Mom's eyes widened slightly. "That's not what I laid out." "This is what I wear to business meetings, Mom. It's appropriate." Before she could respond, the doorbell chimed. Dad straightened his tie one last time, put on his most winning smile, and opened the door to welcome the first guests. The first arrivals were local business associates of Dad's people, who would round out the dinner party, and I suspected make his company seem more established. They were followed shortly by two representatives from Bailey Industries, a middle-aged man named Thomas Whitfield, who introduced himself as VP of Real Estate Development, and his assistant, a younger woman named Sarah Jenkins. I observed from the sidelines as Dad and Ryan performed their well-rehearsed welcome routine. Firm handshakes, practiced jokes, and carefully casual references to recent real estate successes. Mom circulated with drinks while Patricia engaged the wives in conversation about local charity events. When Dad finally brought Thomas over to introduce me, his hand gripped my elbow a little too tightly. "This is my daughter Amanda. She's visiting from California." "Lovely to meet you," Thomas said politely. "What do you do out west?" Before I could answer, Dad jumped in. "Amanda works with computers. Now about the lakefront property we discussed." I extracted myself from Dad's grip and offered my hand directly to Thomas. "I work in tech operations management. Actually, I'm quite familiar with corporate expansion projects." Thomas looked interested. "Really? We're finding the integration of tech infrastructure with physical development increasingly important. What's your perspective on that?" I began to explain some of the challenges and opportunities in creating spaces that serve both technological and human needs, drawing on my extensive experience overseeing global facility expansions. Thomas nodded, with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that allowed me to showcase my knowledge. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Dad's expression darkening. Ryan hovered nearby, trying to interject, but unable to find an entry point into our increasingly technical conversation. When I mentioned the importance of planning for future technological integration, rather than just current needs, Thomas actually took out a notebook to jot down a point I made. "That's exactly the kind of forward-thinking we need," he said. "Too many development projects are obsolete before they're even completed." "If you'd like, I could share some insights about how other companies have approached this successfully," I offered. "I would appreciate that," Thomas replied. "Perhaps, after dinner we could." Amanda, Dad's voice cut through our conversation like a knife. "Could I see you in the kitchen for a moment?" His tone left no room for refusal. I excused myself and followed him through the dining room and into the kitchen, where he closed the door behind us with barely controlled force. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his face flushed with anger. "Having a conversation," I replied, genuinely confused by his reaction. "You're undermining everything. We've been working on this deal for months, and you swoop in trying to impress everyone with computer talk they don't care about." Dad Thomas seemed very interested in what I was saying. "This kind of integration is exactly what companies like Bailey are concerned with." "What would you know about what Bailey Industries cares about?" he scoffed. "You think because you work at some small tech company, you understand how the big leagues operate." The irony was almost painful, but before I could respond, he continued. "Look, Amanda, we need these investors. This is the biggest opportunity Wilson Properties has ever had. I need you to." He paused, seemingly struggling with what he wanted to say. "Need me to what, Dad?" He straightened his shoulders. "I need you to wait in the car." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "Excuse me." "Just until dinner is over," he said, his voice lower, but no less intense. "Thomas was being polite, but you're confusing the issue with all this tech talk. We're discussing real estate development, not whatever it is you do. You want me to sit in the car during your business dinner. I'm your daughter, not a misbehaving pet." "Don't be dramatic," he snapped. "We need this deal to go smoothly. Ryan and I have a specific approach planned, and your contributions are throwing us off track." The kitchen door opened, and Mom peeked in. "Everything okay? The caterers are ready to serve." "Mom," I said, turning to her. "Dad just asked me to wait in the car during dinner." I expected shock, outrage, some defense of her daughter. Instead, she looked away, embarrassed, but not surprised. "Your father knows what's best for this business situation, Amanda. It's just for a little while." The betrayal stung more than I wanted to admit. "You can't be serious." "Wait in the car," Dad hissed again, more forcefully. "We need these investors. Once the business discussion is done, you can come back in for dessert." Ryan appeared in the doorway, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Problem, sis. Your sister feels she needs to dominate the business conversation," Dad told him. "I've asked her to give us some space to handle this properly." "Probably for the best," Ryan agreed with mock sympathy. "These guys don't want to hear about video games and social media." The casual dismissal of my entire career hit me like a physical blow. 10 years of 80-hour weeks of fighting for respect in male-dominated boardrooms, of climbing from entry-level programmer to global operations, president, reduced to video games and social media by people who had no concept of what I actually did. "We're keeping the Bailey representatives waiting," Mom murmured anxiously. Dad put his hand on my back, guiding me not toward the dining room, but toward the side door that led to the driveway. "Just for an hour or so," he said, his voice slightly softer, but no less firm. "We can't risk anything going wrong tonight." The humiliation burned through me, as I found myself being steered outside like an embarrassing family secret. At 32 years old, with more business success than everyone in that house combined, I was being sent to wait in the car during a family dinner. "Fine," I said, pulling away from his guiding hand. "I'll go to a coffee shop. Text me when it's safe to return to my childhood home without embarrassing you." I grabbed my purse and phone from the hallway table and walked out the front door, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing how deeply their rejection had wounded me. Only when I was safely in my rental car did I allow the tears of anger and hurt to well up in my eyes. I sat in my car for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The rational part of my brain told me to drive away, check into a hotel, and book the first flight back to San Francisco in the morning. But something kept me there, a complex mixture of anger, hurt, and unfinished business. My phone buzzed with notifications, providing a welcome distraction from my churning emotions. 3 new emails marked urgent. I opened the first one and felt a jolt of surprise. From James Bailey, CEO, subject Wilson Properties proposal, importance high. Amanda. Change of plans. I've decided to attend the Wilson Properties meeting personally tonight. Something about their development proposal intrigues me, and I'd value your input since you're familiar with the Boston area. If you're available, please call me before 7 p.m. James. I checked the time, 6:47 p.m. The CEO of Bailey Industries, my direct boss and mentor, was personally heading to my father's dinner party. The same dinner I had just been kicked out of. The universe apparently had a twisted sense of humor. I considered calling James immediately but paused. This wasn't just a professional coincidence. This was a pivotal moment in my personal life. I needed space to think. Instead of waiting in the car, as my father had so eloquently suggested, I drove to a small cafe 2 blocks away. The barista smiled as I ordered a black coffee, blissfully unaware of the emotional tornado brewing inside me. Finding a quiet corner table, I reflected on my journey from rejected daughter to company president. It hadn't been easy or straightforward. After leaving home, I had thrown myself into work with single-minded determination. While my peers socialized and dated, I stayed late at the office volunteering for the projects no one else wanted. I studied industry trends on weekends and took coding classes at night to stay current. My first big break came 3 years in, when our startup faced a critical server meltdown during a major product launch. While others panicked, I worked 48 hours straight to rebuild the system and save the release. That caught the attention of the executive team. When Bailey Industries acquired our company 2 years later, most of my colleagues were nervous about being absorbed by the tech giant. I saw opportunity. During the transition meetings, I presented a detailed integration plan that identified $3 million in potential savings. James Bailey himself had pulled me aside afterward. Most people try to protect their territory during acquisitions, he had said. You're thinking about the combined company's success. That's rare. From there, my rise had been meteoric. Director of Operations at 28, Vice President at 30. And now, at 32, President of Global Operations, overseeing technology implementation across 3 continents and reporting directly to James Bailey himself. All this success, and my family still saw me as the rebellious daughter who needed to be sent to her room, or in this case her car, during important conversations. My phone buzzed again. Another email from James asking if I had received his previous message. I realized I needed to make a decision. I could call James and explain the bizarre situation, potentially embarrassing my family but protecting my professional relationship. Or I could stay silent and let the evening unfold naturally, whatever the consequences. The choice crystallized my feelings about what had just happened. My family had made it clear where I stood in their hierarchy of respect. Why was I still protecting their egos at the expense of my dignity? I finished my coffee and made a decision. I wouldn't call James, but I wouldn't hide either. I would return to the house, collect my things, check into a hotel, and leave town first thing in the morning. If I happened to cross paths with James, so be it. 20 minutes after being unceremoniously dismissed, I pulled back into the driveway of my parents' home. 2 additional luxury vehicles had arrived, suggesting the full contingent of Bailey Industries representatives was now present. I planned to slip in through the side door, grab my suitcase from upstairs, and leave a note explaining my early departure. The side entrance led through the kitchen where staff was busy preparing the main course. They barely glanced at me as I passed through toward the staircase. From the dining room came the sound of animated conversation, crystal glasses clinking, and my father's booming laugh, the one he reserved for people he wanted to impress. As I reached for my suitcase in the guest room, I heard a commotion downstairs. A new arrival, a deeper voice joining the conversation. Familiar, authoritative. James Bailey had arrived. Curiosity and a touch of vindication pulled me back toward the stairs. I would simply collect my purse from the hallway table where I'd left it, then slip out unnoticed. But as I descended the stairs, I heard James asking about the property location and my father launching into his well-rehearsed pitch. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned toward the hallway table where my purse lay. To reach it, I needed to cross the edge of the dining room sightline. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, hoping to remain unnoticed. I was 3 steps from my purse when James Bailey's voice stopped mid-sentence. I turned instinctively toward the dining room and found myself looking directly at him across the room. Our eyes met, and his face registered complete surprise. Amanda James Bailey stood frozen mid-gesture, genuine shock evident on his face. He was impeccably dressed as always, his presence, commanding even in surprise. All conversation ceased. Every head turned first to James, then followed his gaze to me, standing in the hallway. "What are you doing here?" James asked, already moving toward me. Before I could answer, he did something that made my father's face drain of all color. He gave me a small, respectful nod, the same one I'd seen him give to board members and government officials. "Madam President," he said, his tone shifting to professional deference, I didn't know this was your family." The silence in the room was absolute. I could practically hear the gears turning in my father's head as he processed those two words, "Madam President." "Hello, James," I replied, summoning every ounce of professional composure I possessed. "I was just leaving, actually." Leaving? James looked genuinely confused. "But we haven't even discussed the Wilson proposal yet. Your input would be invaluable, especially given your local knowledge." My father finally found his voice, though it emerged, strangled, and higher than normal. You two know each other." James turned to him with an expression of polite surprise. "Gerald, you didn't mention that Amanda was your daughter. This is a remarkable coincidence." "I don't understand," my father stammered. "How do you know Amanda?" James looked between us, clearly sensing the tension, but not yet understanding its source. "Amanda is president of global operations at Bailey Industries," he explained, as if stating the obvious. "She oversees all our technological infrastructure and operations across 3 continents. She's my right hand and reports directly to me." The room erupted in barely suppressed gasps and murmurs. Thomas Whitfield, who had been so interested in my perspective earlier, now looked at me with new understanding and respect. The local business associates whispered among themselves. Ryan's mouth literally hung open in shock. "There must be some mistake," my father said weakly. "Amanda works with computers in California, some tech company." "Bailey Industries is headquartered in San Francisco," James confirmed. "And yes, we're somewhat involved with computers." His understatement carried a hint of dry humor. "Amanda oversees billions in operational budgets and has been instrumental in our global expansion strategy. In fact, she's the reason I took a personal interest in this development project." My mother had turned an alarming shade of pale, but she never said. "You never asked," I replied quietly. James turned to me, still confused by the palpable tension. "Amanda, I sent you several messages about attending tonight. Did you not receive them?" "I did," I acknowledged. "Just as I was leaving, actually." I glanced meaningfully at my father, who couldn't meet my eyes. Thomas Whitfield stepped forward, professional instincts kicking in. "Miss Wilson, your insights earlier about technological integration in development projects make much more sense now. I'd be very interested in continuing that conversation." "As would I," added Sarah Jenkins, his assistant. "Your perspective on future-proofing physical infrastructure is exactly what we've been discussing internally." The other Bailey representatives nodded in agreement, all attention now focused on me rather than my father or brother. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. James placed a gentle hand on my elbow. "Amanda, I think we need to regroup here. Would you mind joining us for dinner after all? I believe there's been some confusion." I looked around the room at the faces watching me. My father humiliated, but also bewildered. My mother shocked into silence. Ryan, his smirk replaced by something approaching respect, and the business associates all eagerly awaiting my response. I could have walked out. Part of me wanted to, but I had worked too hard and come too far to let wounded pride dictate my actions. More importantly, I realized I no longer needed my family's validation. I already had everything I had ever worked for. "Of course," I said to James. "I'd be happy to join." The caterers quickly set another place at the table directly opposite my father. As we settled in, James naturally deferred to me on several key points about the proposal, turning the conversation toward the technological aspects of the development that had previously been dismissed as unimportant. "Amanda pioneered our integrated development approach in our Singapore expansion," James explained to the table. "The property values increased 30% because of the forward-thinking infrastructure she implemented." "That's quite an achievement," Thomas remarked, looking impressed. "Amanda has a gift for seeing connections others miss," James continued. "It's why she rose through the ranks so quickly. 7 promotions in 10 years is unheard of even at Bailey." With each revelation, my father seemed to shrink further into himself. Ryan alternated between looking stunned and trying to insert himself back into the conversation, though his contributions now seemed superficial compared to the depth of knowledge around the table. The investors were clearly more interested in my expertise than in the original property pitch. When I suggested some modifications to the development plan that would enhance technological integration while preserving the natural landscape, Thomas actually took notes. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need," he said, nodding enthusiastically. "Gerald, your daughter's insights could transform this project from a standard development into something truly cutting-edge." My father managed a tight smile. "Yes, Amanda has always been innovative." As the main course was served, I maintained absolute professionalism despite the emotional undercurrents swirling around the table. This was a skill I had perfected in countless high-pressure business situations. Show no weakness. Focus on solutions, not problems. Lead with competence, not emotion. By the time dessert arrived, the basic framework of a deal had taken shape, though very different from what my father had originally envisioned. Bailey Industries was indeed interested in the property, but as a technology-integrated community that would showcase sustainable living powered by next-generation tech, not just as a corporate retreat. "Of course, we'll need Amanda's team to oversee the technological implementation," James said casually, as if it were already decided, "if that's amenable to Wilson Properties." My father, who had barely touched his food, nodded quickly. "Of course, we would welcome any input Amanda can provide." When the dinner finally concluded, the Bailey representatives made their way to the door, each stopping to shake my hand and exchange contact information. James held back clearly, wanting a private word. "Amanda, could we speak for a moment before I leave?" he asked. "Of course," I replied, leading him to the small study off the main hallway. Once we were alone, his professional demeanor softened. "What exactly happened here tonight?" I get the distinct impression I walked into a family situation. I hesitated, then decided that honesty was the only option. My family didn't know about my position at Bailey. They've always been dismissive of my career in tech. When I tried to contribute to the conversation earlier, my father asked me to wait in the car during dinner so I wouldn't interfere with his pitch. James's expression darkened. "He asked you to wait in the car. The president of global operations, my right hand. To him I was just his daughter, who plays with computers," I said, unable to keep the hurt completely out of my voice. James shook his head in disbelief. "Well, I think that misconception has been thoroughly corrected." He paused, studying me. "Are you okay?" The simple question, asked with genuine concern, almost broke through my carefully maintained composure. "I will be," I answered truthfully. "Take tomorrow off," he said. "Family is complicated. We can reconvene on the Wilson project when you're back in San Francisco." "Thank you, James." As he left, I steeled myself to face my family, knowing the real confrontation was just beginning. After the last guest departed, an oppressive silence filled the house. Mom busied herself directing the caterers in cleanup, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Ryan and Patricia huddled in whispered conversation by the fireplace. Dad stood by the dining room window, staring out into the darkness, his shoulders uncharacteristically slumped. I considered simply going upstairs without a word, but that would only postpone the inevitable. Better to face this head-on. I walked into the kitchen where Dad had retreated, pouring himself a generous glass of scotch. "Were you ever going to tell us?" he asked. Without turning around, his voice strained. "Would it have mattered?" I countered. "You and Ryan decided years ago that what I do isn't real business." He turned to face me, anger flashing in his eyes. "You deliberately kept secrets from your family. Let us believe you were some low-level tech worker when all this time you've been." "What exactly?" "Some kind of executive." "President of global operations," I corrected him. "And yes, it's exactly the executive position it sounds like. I oversee technological operations across 3 continents. I manage teams totaling over 2,000 people. My annual budget responsibility is in the billions. And James Bailey, the CEO, You were so desperate to impress reports to the same board I do. And you never thought to mention any of this. Not once in 10 years. His voice rose with each word. We're your family. When exactly should I have mentioned it, Dad? When you were telling me my career choice was frivolous, when Ryan was offering me an entry-level position at your company, or maybe tonight when you were shoving me out the door because you thought I'd embarrass you in front of investors, who it turns out work for me. I was trying to secure the future of this family's business. No, I shot back. You were trying to protect your ego. You couldn't stand that I might know something you don't, that I might actually contribute something valuable to the conversation. That's not fair, he protested, but with less conviction. Isn't it 10 years, Dad? For 10 years I've listened to you and Ryan belittle my career choices. You never once asked what I actually do. You assumed I was failing because I wasn't following your path. The kitchen door swung open, and Mom entered, her expression a mixture of hurt and confusion. Amanda, why didn't you tell us? We're your parents. We had a right to know. A right, I repeated incredulously. You had opportunities to know. Hundreds of them. Every phone call where you changed the subject when I mentioned work. Every holiday gathering where my professional achievements were ignored, while Ryan's small property deals were celebrated. You didn't want to know because it didn't fit your narrative about me. That's not true, Mom insisted, but her eyes betrayed her. It was exactly true. When I made director at 28, I called to tell you. Dad said, "That's nice, dear," and then talked for 20 minutes about Ryan's new office. When I was promoted to vice president, I mentioned it at Christmas dinner. Aunt Judy asked what that meant, and before I could answer, Dad jumped in with, "It's just a fancy title they give out in tech companies." So I stopped sharing. Ryan appeared in the doorway, Patricia hovering behind him. "You could have corrected us," he said defensively. "Made us understand." I tried, Ryan. For years I tried. But none of you wanted to hear it. It was easier to think of me as the family disappointment who made a foolish career choice. "We never thought you were a disappointment," Mom protested. Really? Then, why was I asked to wait in the car tonight? Why was I literally removed from a family dinner? Because Dad thought I wasn't good enough to be part of the conversation. Dad flinched at the raw hurt in my voice. For the first time I saw something crack in his expression. Not just embarrassment at being wrong, but genuine regret. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I had no idea you were so successful." "That's just it, Dad. You never tried to know. You decided 10 years ago that my choices were wrong, and you never revisited that judgment no matter how much evidence suggested otherwise." The kitchen fell silent as my words hung in the air. For perhaps the first time they were really hearing me. "I'm sorry," Dad finally said, the words seemingly difficult for him to form. "I was wrong. About tonight, about your career. About a lot of things, apparently." The simple admission, something I had never heard from him before, caught me off guard. I had expected more defensiveness, more deflection, but perhaps the evening's revelations had been too overwhelming to deny. "Your father has always worried about you," Mom added softly. "When you left for California, he was sure you'd struggle. I think it became easier to believe that than to accept we might have been wrong." "The company you work for," Ryan interjected. Professional curiosity overtaking his defensiveness. "Bailey Industries. Is worth what? 50 billion. And you're one of their top executives." "One of 6 presidents reporting directly to the CEO," I confirmed. "And yes, our market cap was 62 billion at market close today." Ryan let out a low whistle, genuine respect, replacing his usual condescension. "That's impressive, sis. Really impressive." A knock at the kitchen door interrupted our family reckoning. James had returned, looking slightly apologetic. "Sorry to intrude. I left my portfolio, and the night security team will need those documents." His eyes swept over our tense gathering. "Is everything all right?" "Family discussion," I explained simply. James nodded understandingly. "Gerald, Elaine, if I might say something, You have an extraordinary daughter. Amanda is one of the most brilliant minds in our industry. Half the CEOs in Silicon Valley have tried to poach her from me. When she speaks, boardrooms go silent to listen. You should be incredibly proud. Dad cleared his throat, clearly moved despite himself. We are proud. We just didn't fully understand until tonight. Well, now you know, James said with a smile. And about the development project, I think with Amanda's input, this could be a tremendous opportunity for Wilson Properties. You still want to work with us? Dad asked, surprised. After tonight's confusion. Business is business, James replied pragmatically. And with Amanda bridging both worlds, I think this partnership could be exceptionally successful. After James left with his recovered portfolio, the tension in the kitchen had noticeably shifted. Not gone, but transformed into something more contemplative. Would you really help with the development? Dad asked cautiously. I considered the question. Despite everything, I didn't want to punish my family. This project could secure their business future, and my expertise could genuinely improve it. Yes, I decided, but on one condition. From now on, I'm treated as an equal, not as your little girl who needs to be managed, but as the professional I am. Dad nodded solemnly. That's more than fair. And we'd like to hear about your work, Mom added. Really hear about it this time. I'd like that too, I admitted. Ryan extended his hand formally, a gesture between business equals, rather than the condescending hair ruffle I was accustomed to. Partners, he offered. I took his hand, feeling the first tendrils of a new relationship forming. Partners. As the evening wound down, we moved to the living room with fresh drinks, the conversation turning toward my actual career journey. For the first time, my family listened with genuine interest as I explained the challenges and triumphs of the past decade. There were still awkward moments and old habits that surfaced, but there was also something new: respect. By the time we all headed to bed exhausted from the emotional day, the foundation had been laid for a different kind of family relationship. Not perfect, not instantly healed, but honest, in a way it hadn't been for years. In the morning as we gathered for breakfast, Dad surprised me by asking detailed questions about Bailey Industries' approach to sustainable technology. Mom wanted to know about my life in San Francisco, not just superficial questions about the weather, but about my friends, my home, the things that mattered to me. When the investors called to follow up on the previous night's discussions, Dad handed me the phone without hesitation. They're asking for you, he said simply. The expert. As I guided the conversation toward a framework that would benefit both Bailey Industries and my family's company, I caught Dad watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, pride untainted by competition or comparison. For the first time in my adult life, he was seeing me, not the daughter who had disappointed him, but the woman I had become. The morning after the revelation dinner, as Mom served pancakes at the breakfast table, a tentative new family dynamic began to emerge. The shock had worn off, replaced by curiosity, and surprisingly, a hint of admiration in my father's eyes. So tell me about your typical day, Dad asked, passing the maple syrup. What does a president of global operations actually do? The simple question, asked with genuine interest, rather than skepticism, marked a turning point. For the next hour, I walked them through my responsibilities, the challenges of coordinating teams across different time zones, and the strategic decisions that shaped Bailey Industries' global infrastructure. That sounds incredibly complex, Mom remarked, her expression thoughtful. All these years we had no idea. Because I stopped sharing, I admitted. After enough dismissals, it seemed easier to keep my professional life separate. Dad stared into his coffee cup, uncharacteristically reflective. I never gave you a fair chance to explain. I was so convinced my way was the only path to success. Real estate made sense to you, I acknowledged. It was tangible. Tech is different, more abstract. But no less real, Dad conceded. The way James and those investors respected you last night, that wasn't abstract at all. Ryan, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. How did you do it? Rise so quickly in such a competitive industry. For the first time, my brother's question contained no trace of condescension, just authentic curiosity. I explained the long hours, the risks I'd taken, the projects I'd championed, when others thought they would fail. Sounds like you got Dad's determination after all, Ryan observed with a small smile. Just applied it differently. I did, I agreed, realizing the truth in his words. Maybe we're more alike than different in some ways. As the morning progressed, Mom pulled out photo albums, pointing to childhood pictures. You were always figuring out how things worked. She recalled showing a photo of me at 7, dismantling an old radio. We should have seen your path earlier. I wish you'd been there for parts of it, I admitted, the hurt still raw beneath the surface. Building a career without family support was the hardest part. I'm sorry, Mom said softly, tears welling in her eyes. We should have listened, should have supported you, even if we didn't understand. Dad cleared his throat, clearly struggling with emotions that didn't come naturally to him. I was wrong, Amanda. About your career, about last night, about a lot of things. When you left home, I was convinced you'd fail without my guidance. Every year you stayed away, succeeded without us. It became harder to admit I might have been wrong. Pride, I said, understanding dawning. It wasn't just that you thought I was making a mistake. It was that I was succeeding without following your path. He nodded slowly. I built my identity around being the successful one, the provider, the business expert. Your independence challenged that. The honest admission hung between us, fragile but healing. For my father to acknowledge his own insecurity was unprecedented. I didn't succeed to prove you wrong, I told him. I did it because I loved the work, still do. That's what real success looks like, Mom observed. Not just achievement, but fulfillment. Ryan leaned forward. Will you tell us about the hardest parts? What we missed? I took a deep breath and shared what I'd never dared before. The loneliness of those early years in San Francisco. The times I'd almost given up. The milestones celebrated alone in my tiny apartment. The promotions announced to empty rooms. The awards gathering dust on shelves, with no family photos beside them. The pain wasn't that you disagreed with my choices, I explained. It was that you stopped seeing me altogether. Replaced me with a caricature that was easier to dismiss. Dad's hand trembled slightly as he reached for mine across the table, a gesture so unexpected I almost pulled away. I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not being there when you needed support, not seeing who you really are. It's not too late, I said, surprising myself with the forgiveness in my voice. We can start now. The conversation shifted to the future, to building a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than outdated perceptions. Mom wanted to visit San Francisco. Ryan had questions about technology integration for Wilson Properties. Dad most surprisingly asked if I would consider being an official advisor to the family business. We could use your perspective, he said, not just for the Bailey project but for modernizing our approach overall. Later that morning, I had a follow-up call with James about the Wilson property development. When he asked if the family situation had been resolved, I found myself answering with unexpected optimism. We're working on it, I told him. There's decades of misunderstanding to unpack, but we've made a start. Families are complicated, James observed. Sometimes the hardest people to impress are the ones who should believe in us most. That's exactly it, I agreed. For years I tried to earn their approval by succeeding on their terms. Then I gave up and built my life without them. But neither approach brought peace. And now? I considered the question. Now I'm learning that true success isn't about winning their approval or proving them wrong. It's about being fully myself and creating space for authentic connection, whatever that looks like. After the call, I sat on the porch swing of my childhood home, watching the neighborhood I'd grown up in. The same trees, the same sidewalks, but everything felt different. I was different. And finally my family was seeing me with new eyes. Dad joined me on the swing, slightly awkward but determined. "I've been thinking about what happened last night," he said. "Being asked to wait in the car must have been humiliating." It was, I acknowledged, not softening the truth. "I can't undo that moment," he continued. "But I want you to know I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished. Not because of your title, or because your boss impressed me, but because you had the courage to follow your own path even when I tried to hold you back." The words I'd waited a decade to hear. Not perfect, not erasing all the hurt, but a beginning. Over the next few days, we established a new foundation. Mom and I planned regular video calls, not just obligatory holiday check-ins. Ryan and I outlined areas where our expertise could complement each other. Dad most significantly asked me to explain exactly what I did, listening intently without interruption for perhaps the first time in our relationship. When it was time to return to San Francisco, the goodbye was different from any before. Not because everything was magically resolved, but because we were finally seeing each other clearly. The hurt hadn't disappeared, but alongside it grew understanding, respect, and the potential for something healthier. On the flight home, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The path from dismissed daughter to respected professional hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been wounds along the way, some still tender to the touch. But I realized that the greatest freedom came not from proving my worth to others, but from knowing it myself. Success wasn't just about titles or recognition. It was about building a life aligned with my values, surrounded by people who saw and respected the real me. For years I had excluded my family from that circle, protecting myself from their judgment. Now perhaps there was room for a new kind of relationship, based not on old expectations, but on who we had all become. The revelation dinner had forced a long overdue recognition, but the real transformation would come in the days and weeks ahead, in the small moments of connection, the gradual rebuilding of trust, the willingness to see each other with fresh eyes. As the plane banked toward San Francisco, I felt lighter than I had in years, not because everything was resolved, but because I no longer carried the weight of seeking approval or nursing resentment. The future relationship with my family would be built on reality, rather than illusion, on mutual respect, rather than old hierarchies. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do isn't proving others wrong or right. It's simply being authentically ourselves and creating space for others to do the same. That night at the dinner table had shattered illusions on all sides, but from those broken pieces, something more honest could finally emerge. Have you ever had a moment when your family or friends finally saw your true worth after dismissing you for years? How did you handle it? Was it vindicating or more complicated than that? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding your authentic path, even when those closest to you can't see it. Remember, sometimes the greatest success isn't proving others wrong, but finding the freedom to be fully yourself regardless of others' opinions. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it inspires you to stand firm in your own truth.